Welcome, Gary.
Thank you for having me.
Nice seeing you today. The topic of offshore accounts and tax evasion, I think, is interest to our clients because I think some of them may be looking at ways to explore where to diversify their funds. So, can you tell me a little bit about, what we're going to hear about today?
Yeah, well, I'll give it to you as an excerpt from a song. If you're going to do this, you want to straighten up and fly right. My name is Gary Wolfe. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm an international tax expert on the IRS, international tax planning. I've won 17 different international tax planning and other awards from 7 separate global expert societies in London and the United Kingdom. I have published 17 books on Amazon as ebooks and over 100 articles, almost 20 of which are with Cal CEO, on cutting-edge tax issues. The topic today is criminal tax evasion, more importantly, prosecution for criminal tax evasion. So here's the question. What are you risking by committing tax evasion? You're risking jail, you're risking fees, you're risking loss of income, you're risking loss of assets, you're risking misery. Another question is, well, how can you win a criminal tax audit? You can't. The only question is how much you lose in time, misery, and fees. Think about it as hockey. The goalie doesn't want any goals. You don't want any audits. If you have an audit, you want to win the audit. How do you win the audit? You're prepared. When you do tax planning, you make sure you have complete documentary evidence. You make sure that your law is cited and then you have a tax opinion so there's no guessing here. Now, there was a Internal Revenue Service Commissioner named Sheldon Cohen who had an interesting quote which I think describes what you're facing. Taxation in reality is life. If you know a person's position on taxes, you can tell their whole philosophy. What is criminal tax evasion? It is intentionally and willfully and deliberately failing to either pay your tax, file a tax return, or file a false tax return. Why is that a problem? That isn't a problem. That is 4 separate tax crimes. IRC Section 7201, willful evasion of tax, a 5-year felony. IRC Section 7212, obstruction of IRS tax collection, a 3-year felony. IRC 7206, filing a false tax return, a 3-year felony. 18 U.S.C. Section 371, in tandem with another, commit conspiracy to commit tax evasion, which is another felony for 5 years. And then for all of you who are offshore, if you fail to report a foreign bank or financial account with 10,000 or more, that's a 10-year felony for each year it's not reported. So let's say you have an offshore account with 11,000 in it, you don't report it, you're facing 5 felonies, 26 years in jail. And that is not your big problem. There are a trio of sister felonies: money laundering, wire fraud, and mail fraud. Under the 2005 U.S. Supreme Court case called Pasquantino, if somebody does not pay federal, state, or foreign taxes, it's analogized to stealing from a treasury, embezzlement. It is also a crime. And it is not just a crime of tax evasion, it is a crime related to tax evasion. If you use the funds to buy an asset, that's money laundering. 20-year felony, disguising the source, origin, and nature of the funds by buying a new asset. If you make an interstate phone call or wire transfer the funds, it's another 20-year felony. It's called wire fraud. If you use the U.S. mails, that's another 20-year felony. That's called mail fraud. So what do you have here? You have 8 separate felonies for one undisclosed offshore bank account, looking at almost 90 years in jail. And if you're offshore and you don't file the report of foreign bank and financial account, known as the Form 114, also known as an FBAR filing, as well as the Form 8938, foreign financial statement, which are your assets, and you attach that to your personal tax return over $50,000, you're facing multiple felonies and huge fines. For the FBAR fine alone, if it's willful, it's a 50% annual penalty, aggregated annually. Carl's Warner, Florida taxpayer, didn't pay his FBAR, didn't file his FBAR. No payment was due. The IRS pursued him on a civil FBAR penalty, no criminal charges, no 10-year felony. Went to trial in 2014. A 150% of the account balance penalty was assessed. He had $1.6 million account. The IRS took almost $2.4 million from him. Now, you're in this situation and you wonder how you got there and what do you do? So let's look at a hypothetical. You went to one of these Swiss banks, UBS for example. They gave up your name with almost 5,000 other Americans. You had $10 million on account. You never filed an FBAR. You never reported the account. You never reported the earnings. You lied. You put down in your Form 1040, Schedule B, Part 3, Line 7, that you didn't have a foreign bank account. You are now facing willful tax evasion, an intentional violation of a known duty. Why is that bad? Because it'll trigger up to 8 separate felonies, up to 90 years in jail, and more fines and penalties than you have on the account. And the IRS has 10 years to collect on a federal tax lien, and the state of California has 20 years if they renew the lien, and they can both be extended for criminal behavior. So you have to be very careful on how you respond. And the mistake that most people make is they save professional fees. I call that short-term gain, long-term pain. Take the case of a priest in San Jose. Stole money from his parishioners. Didn't declare it. He wound up being visited by the Internal Revenue Service, who said to him, "Can you tell us about it?" Which of course he did. The single dumbest thing imaginable is to speak with the IRS without counsel. Father Hin Min Noon pled guilty to tax evasion for 4 years for stealing funds from his parishioners. He didn't tell his tax preparer, he didn't keep his records, he didn't tell anybody, except he told the IRS Criminal Investigation Division when he showed up. Now my guess he was feeling guilty and he was scared. All the more reason to use a lawyer. If you're going to be in this mess, you have to understand something. The IRS are not your friends. And as I alluded to earlier, their position is that your philosophy of life and taxes is you are a criminal. Now in many countries, tax crimes are just that. Nobody cares. The United States fought a revolution over taxes. In the United States, taxes are a big issue. And they're certainly a big criminal tax issue. So, you now have 10 million at UBS, what do? The first thing is you look through your tax returns to see if the accounts were ever disclosed, to see if the FBARs were ever filed. Since 2011, were the Form 8938s ever filed? If the answer is no to all of the above, you need to find out what happened. If what you've done is deliberately and willfully, intentionally failed to pay your taxes, you have a very good chance of going to jail, and it's a very hard case. If you relied on advisors, or you were misled, or you misunderstood, or the key word is you had a good faith belief that either the tax return wasn't required or the taxes weren't due, that is a reasonable cause exception. Now, people that are in this situation look to the following alternatives. The Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program. I don't like it, I don't recommend it, except if you are willful and intentional, because then it's your only shot. But let's assume that you decide to enter it. First and foremost, they're now charging 50% penalties for listed foreign financial institutions, which include, my understanding is, over 100 Swiss banks, with more coming, including banks in Israel, Singapore, the Caymans, and the Caribbean. Not only are you in trouble with the IRS over this, from a criminal standpoint, they get information on you yearly now because of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Over 100,000 foreign financial institutions in over 80 countries are now giving U.S. taxpayer information to the IRS digitally starting in 2016. The law was passed in 2010. It took them 6 years to implement. They just started giving information at the end of 2015. 2016 is the first banner year. So let's say you go to the IRS, you submit an offshore voluntary disclosure, and you have to give them all your information. And you don't tell them the truth, and they get additional information from one of these banks, you'll be thrown out. What's wrong with that? First and foremost, when you enter the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program, you are entering it without either transactional immunity or use immunity, meaning the evidence you present can be used against you, and there's no criminal protection at all. Secondly, you're waiving all of your constitutional rights. Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Eighth Amendment right against excessive fines. Bad. Third, you're flying right into the radar. You are alerting the IRS as to you, everything you've done, everybody you've done it with, and you are now increasing the odds that A, you may be audited, thrown out of the program. They don't have to give you a reason, as happened with Bank Leumi. They just threw thousands of people out of the voluntary disclosure program. You have no safety net here, and there's no guarantee they will accept it. And as of July 2014, if you don't give them complete account records, which you may not have, that's grounds for invalidating your application and throwing you out of the program. So, offshore voluntary disclosure program, the IRS estimates up to 10 million US people have undisclosed offshore accounts. It's costing the federal, state, and local governments $184 billion a year for the several trillion dollars in taxes that are offshore. $184 billion a year. They've known about this since at least 2006, when they initiated the Stop Tax Haven Act through the Senate. That is 10 years. That is $1.5 trillion in missing tax revenues. So far, they've collected less than $10 billion from less than 60,000 people. They're not even getting 1% of this. That is how much money is sitting offshore and is waiting to blow up. And the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act is going to be the source of information. So for all of you people that believe that you've been cheating and keep cheating, in the words of my favorite Nobel laureate, Bob Dylan, it's all over now, baby blue. Your days are numbered. Digital transmission of information from government to government, from the IRS to the taxing authorities in these host countries, it's going to give all the information about you and your accounts, and if it's not disclosed, you're the one who pays for it.